like there are 17 or so folks either viewing or a collective 17 of us. So I'll welcome anyone who is viewing today to this table. And thank everybody for joining. So excited to be here and to moderate today's conversation. And looking forward to, just hearing from this table of experts that are here, hoping that we lean into what is really a conversation and not, just kind of question and answer. In today's space, there's so much for us to talk about, particularly in the space of education and all that entails with this pandemic that is affecting each and every one of us in every corner of this world. There's no one that can say they're not touched or affected by this, much as there's no one that can say really that they're not touched or affected by education in some way. And so again, really excited to be here with you all. My name is Sherita Love. I'm here in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm director of EdHub STL, which is basically a platform for educators in the St. Louis region to reimagine education with equity at the center, in ways that we can really center our kids in this conversation of equity and ensure that outcomes are positive for all of our students. And also joining today and at today's table, we have Jeanette Tran, who is the managing director of STEM Reactor and member services of Edugrowth. We have Crystal Barnett, who is the executive director of St. Louis Bridge to Hope, which is a parent advocacy organization. We have Carlos Vasquez. He is the president and CEO of Miami EdTech. David Clayton, who is the director of Firsthand, a STEM initiative at the University City Science Center. Hey, David. Now I'm remembering. I'm like, why do I know David? Okay, I remember meeting you. And then we have Masa Seto. Am I saying that right? Okay. Who is the founder of Soma, and we'll learn more about each of today's table guests and a bit more about what they do. So I'm going to invite voices here in just a second, and I'm just going to kind of go in the order of introduction. So and invite each of you just to say a little bit about what you do and what really brought you into this conversation today, like the reason you said yes to this conversation today, basically. So let's start with Jeanette and then just kind of go around.
Hi, so like Sherita said, my name is Jeanette Tran. I look after all the members for an EdTech community in Australia called Edugrowth. So we're an industry hub for education innovations across Australia. We have members from all different parts of the sector, including education institutions, government, and education companies. And really the aim of Edugrowth is to collaborate. So the aim is to collaborate, connect all the community so that we can collaborate and accelerate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. Ultimately, what we really want to be doing is deliver Australian quality education to every student in the world, wherever they are. And so the reason why I'm here on this call today is I just really wanted to bring an Australian perspective on what we've been experiencing over the last sort of 5 months, and also just really talk about where we think education is going from the perspective of an EdTech community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Crystal?
I'm Crystal Barnett. I do run a parent advocacy, parent-led organization. What we do is we teach parents how to advocate in the space and fight against inequitable practices and the system of failure that our kids have been trapped in for decades. The reason why I came to this call is because I 1000% believe that this is a golden time for people to reevaluate how they go about making the next set of decisions for schools, and that it's very important that they don't leave the parents most affected out of that conversation. And
absolutely,
people can work together in unity and think about the child first, then we can move in a space where the platform is solid and the real growth is happening in every space where every child is. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you. Carlos?
Ready there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carlos Vasquez. I'm CEO and founder of an organization called Miami EdTech. Our focus is on professional development with teachers. So we focus on computer science and entrepreneurship, helping teachers better prepare students for the jobs of today. That's my background. I've been in education since a couple years after college. I became a teacher through a program called the New York City Teaching Fellows. And quickly I saw that our most you can't get any more essential teachers, and unfortunately we don't really do the right type of investment in teachers. So our focus has been on really trying to bring innovative curriculum and connect them, and dedicating the time and energy it takes to really get teachers, first of all, inspired to work around STEM, because many of our Black Latinx educators have been disconnected from opportunities to be inspired by tech, let alone teach it. So we really take a holistic approach to supporting educators to deliver content, because they're obviously in charge of inspiring our students. And it's been a wonderful ride here in Miami-Dade, which is the 4th largest school district in the country. Mm-hmm. And we are now, again, focused on bringing in a computer science program to every school here in the city.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Masa?
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me a part of this. This is like first ever Global Virtual Thursday, right? Thursday gathering. So thank you very much. I'm Masa Seto. I'm a founder and representative director of nonprofit organization called SOMA. I got my PhD from Cornell, but in entomology and ecology. So I am not, academically speaking, I'm not a professional in education, but I have a lot of practices in educating in various environments. Back in 2016, I worked for Cornell by the end of 2015, and then in 2016, I moved back to Japan, and in a small town in the mountain area of Western Japan, I worked for a town hall office as an education program coordinator for a year. And I became independent and founded SOMA because the Japanese education needs to be redefined and the education environment needs to be reformed. Can I take one more minute about, because, Japanese situation and then, the situation, education situation in US and Australia are quite different. Mm-hmm. So Japanese society has a strong image of like right person. So this mold of the right person is very solid. Mm-hmm. And many students believe it is best for them to fit in the mold. Many teachers believe it is best to cast students into the mold. Mm-hmm. So such unhealthy relationship has turned Japanese school into a very strange environment for human development. Mm. So I guess you guys will believe that there are public schools that regulate students' hair colors. The teachers believe that Japanese people should have black hair color. Mm-hmm. So if you have like a naturally brown or naturally light black hair, teachers will order you to dye your hair in black. Mm-hmm. And then if you do not, you like to keep your natural hair, you need to go to the like a doctor and they get the proof that you have this natural hair. Mm-hmm. And then other thing is like the color of students' underwear. Mm-hmm. They do regulate that too. And then some teacher actually check the color of the students' underwear. So it's pretty disgusting. And I'm really waiting for the Human Rights Watch to come to see all those public school. But anyways, so like thanks to such belief, like Japan succeeded in like a mass produce very obedient, indecisive middle class people, and then so our economy like exploded well. But now the world has changed in this global economy context. our economy has constantly declined and Japan is getting poor. So we, a lot of people and the students and teachers started to realize we have to do something. And we are part of that kind of activity, so that we are teaming up with the like a town hall, school, parents, parents and teachers association. We are sort of the core of each stakeholder of the education, and I'm coordinating basically everything. And so I'm going to talk about a little more about what we do later in this session. Thanks.
Yeah, I see you came to preach today, so thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And David.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Clayton. I'm the director of STEM education at the Science Center in Philadelphia. We are a urban research park located in West Philadelphia. We have been a nonprofit organization for approximately 55 years. About 6 years ago, I started the Firsthand program, really with the understanding that you can't be what you can't see. And in our center, we have at any one time now probably 150 startups. And so the goal of our program is really to connect young people, starting at the middle grades, like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, to the kind of STEM entrepreneur ecosystem at the Science Center. We currently partner with 13 schools, and we're right now really trying to re-envision what that looks like. And I'm hoping to talk. Oh wait, Sherita, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Welcome to each, again, welcome to each of you to the table, and for sharing a bit more about yourselves and what you do. So again, let's just jump into the conversation, and we'll work together to keep it as natural, as a natural conversation as possible. And then if we have any spaces where, we need any prompting, any questions that come up in the chat, we'll just take those as they come. So the first question that I'm going to pitch to this group is really centered in, kind of some of the Venture Cafe's philosophy, right? So thinking about how innovators like yourselves, how can innovators like yourselves reinvent how humans learn from home and in the classroom safely and effectively? I'll repeat that. So how can innovators reinvent how humans learn from home and in the classroom safely and effectively? And I'll pause just for whoever wants to jump into that first question.
Just going to jump in and not really answer the question, but one of the things I've been thinking about specifically in the case of learning from home compared to learning in the classroom is the idea we have been talking about quite often recently is the difference between face-to-face learning and then the online environment. And I think one of the things that we've been seeing quite a lot of recently is the migration of classrooms onto platforms like Zoom, video conferencing, things like that, which are really not exactly online education per se. It's more face-to-face learning, but over the internet instead. And so one of the things that we're looking at is how do innovators then take the next step to put a layer on top of that to actually support learning outside of that face-to-face environment better, and not just while the teacher is in front of that student. And that's, I think, a huge area that will continue to grow and evolve over I think the last question you have, just to spoilers, is over the next 10 years or so is really, that's the direction that I really see, that layer on top over not just and talking to a class face-to-face, how do we also put a layer of technology to support teaching online?
Yeah, I would add that, I think the role of, I think what we struggle with and what we've struggled with in the past is a lot of times we find people from kind of the innovation ecosystem that want to be engaged in education, but they don't really know how to plug in. And the kind of traditional way of plugging in is like doing volunteering, In the US, Big Brothers and Big Sisters. But Big Brothers and Big Sisters is like a very high, it's 200 plus hours a year of engagement with a young person. And so what we really provide is we're a low level mentorship. So what our ask to mentors is 3 hours over the course of a semester. And traditionally that's been in person. I think now that's going to be shifting to virtually. But I think what we really need is we really need people from industry and not leaders, people who are actually like making things happen in industry, in various sectors of the economy, engaging in kind of a wide mentoring program for young people, so that they really understand the pathways into careers. Because I think a lot of times those pathways many people's career pathways are a little bit zigzagging and they're not quite linear. And I think young people really need to understand that aspect of, the thing that you want to be when you're 16 or 17 isn't always the thing you become. And that's okay. And I think it's very helpful for them to hear from people who have already lived that path, ideally people they can identify with. So if I bring a group of young men to meet a Black male scientist in Philadelphia, the conversation completely changes. It changes to like, how did you get to where you are? What are the steps you took? What was your career trajectory like? And I think that young people really need those pathways. And I think we can provide that virtually. It's just about being creative and how you actually make that matchmaking happen in a safe way. Because we all know that there's so many dark corners of the internet, and we're really kind of giving young people especially this school year, sort of the keys to the internet. And so I think it really is, it's incumbent upon us to kind of create like a new apparatus and system for young people to engage and to really have that early career learning experience that kind of like leads them on stepping stones towards a career pathway.
I think I agree with David, but one thing I want to highlight is the importance of the individual approach. So when we go back into schools, we need to go back in thinking about each individual child's value, and then how we can build virtual learning and platforms for the child individually to get to the point that David was speaking about. So where then you will have a plan that what this child needs or doesn't need, what kind of resources they need to have, what they don't need to have, what kind of supports we need to put in place. And then it also helps you find that person that can help grow that person into the space where they become linear and can make great decisions in their careers. One thing I think we can do all in the space now is recognize the fact that that cookie cutter, one way of doing things for every child is just not going to work anymore. And because we have the space to be creative, you can now be so creative to say that you have created such a space for every child to feel welcomed in. Every child knows what their strengths and weaknesses are and can be working on them. Parents need to be educated about some of the things that they can do to help support at home. And then when it feels more like a partnership, then you're building solid foundations and safe spaces for students, especially to navigate on the internet. Like this, it's about that time for us to just really start thinking about we can empower people with our knowledge and our education, and then create a space for parents to feel welcome, even if they don't completely know what they're doing, in order to help their children navigate, especially in a time like now.
I think, I agree with, three of you. And then another point is it is very important to understand online and offline are very different environment. What happened back in Japan, in Japan, so we have the national school closure in March and for 2 months or so. And what teachers really tried to do was, they are trying to substitute offline, teaching experience with the online teaching system. But, online, like engaging with students, through online system is you need to have like a different set of communication technique, and also like a teaching contents and the methods. So I think at this point, like in this like a Corona era, we have to think about how we can effectively use online technology to improve the user experience of, and also the learning experience of students. So one of the things we are doing, the Soma is doing, is that we are teaming up with Sony, and then we are developing like a telepresence system. So we are using large display, and also that sort of a specific setting of the microphone, so that like this kind of a video conference system, most of the noises are cut off. So I know that you guys are listening to me, but I don't feel like we are in the same room. So what we are trying to do is using the Sony's technology, like a camera technology and also the audio technology. We are we are basically making a window, so that people over the window feels like you're right there. Here in my office, you can see that like a circle over there in the back. It's actually one of the window system. And then when you see like a kindergarten kids, visit my office and they see that somebody is across the window, they actually try to go in the window. Such experience can be generated even we are using only the digital technology. And I think enhancing those experiences is another thing we really have to think about.
I guess I'll close out with some thoughts on the topic of innovation. For me, it boils down to what causes people to innovate, because you have extrinsic, intrinsic motivations. And with what's happening during this time, first and foremost, our movement in terms of anti-racist, having an anti-racist society and taking proactive steps to redefine what it means to address equity in education. And then we have a pandemic that caused us to think about how we teach. So there's two things that are happening right now that are in crisis mode. First is, how do we use technology, of course, but second is, how do we incorporate anti-racist curriculum and literature and teaching to our students? And both are due to kind of these big bangs that happen, unfortunately. And I think education has taken on a reactive dynamic, where you react versus being proactive and incorporate these things, as we should have been doing for many years. So now we're playing catch up, because we've transitioned in this emergency phase, which to me is unfair to our students, is unfair to our teachers, unfair to families. There's no reason why we transition, for us to transition in an emergency phase. It's almost like there was a, I picture a, in case of emergency, break the glass, and there's like a keyboard in there, and we broke the glass when we should have been doing it slowly, and training our teachers and investing in our teachers and paying our teachers what they deserve. Instead, we kind of now are playing catch up and having them do everything we wanted them to do, overnight. They literally transition to this environment in days. People don't recognize in days. It's in days, in a couple of days. The announcement came out. I remember seeing the NBA game, and the next day everything was shut down. I think it was the Utah Jazz game. So, we have to ask ourselves, who's in positions of leadership and authority to allow for innovation to happen? And if we don't have people who are, bold enough to make decisions that are going to be, uncomfortable, then we're going to continue to perpetuate what's happening. And it's the same thing. I want to quote Beverly Tatum, who's why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria, who talks about the moving walkway. If you don't take steps and are active in terms of society, and you're anti-racist, it's the same idea in innovation and education. If you just continue to move along the walkway, we're not going to prepare our students for what's happening around us. So we need to make drastic change. So for me, I'm a innovator by nature and blood, and that was a tough thing to have, a characteristic in education, which is why I left the formal classroom to figure out ways to say and yell from the mountaintop, we need to change things. So, you can yell from the mountaintop, but unless people are willing to make push the right buttons and allow things to happen, unfortunately, we're going to, see this again after we, return back to normal.
All right, everybody, that's it. Thank you for coming. We're done talking. No. Yeah, thank you for each of you and what you brought into the room today. Like, yes. I started to type in the chat. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be moderating. So I got I pull myself back. Yes. So thank you. I appreciate everything that's been said and added. And thank you, Carlos, as a anti-racist educator, pulling that into the conversation as well, because that is a part of the way we think innovatively, as we should have always been thinking, but that is certainly a part of the conversation, particularly. We're not exempt here in the U.S., but it is a particular conversation in U.S. context as well. So I'm going to move just to our next question. And Crystal and Masa and Carlos, you also kind of alluded to this a bit, but thinking about new ideas, just new ideas that people are testing out while we're in this virtual environment of education. So are there things that you have seen yourselves, or that you're trying yourselves, or even things that you think that we should be leaning into in different communities? New ideas that folks are testing out while we're in this virtual education environment.
Well, so okay, so I'm running a small free school too, and then so when the school was closed, we started to shift everything into online-based program, and then it went well. Because before we switched from offline to online, we had such great and also that the very condensed time with students. So we trust each other, we believe each other. So we could have had the very good online environment. But after we continued that for 5 months, we're tired, and then we strongly, and we came to the point that we need offline time. And so what's going to happen in my free school is Japanese government is going to support us, and what we are going to try to do the rest of the year is that we are going to hybrid the offline and online. So we have a 3 week of an online program, and then we keep searching the very safe place somewhere in Japan, very low risk of getting the corona, COVID-19. And then we're gonna have a camp, 5-day camp program, and then we go back to the online program for 3 weeks, and like a sandwich of something like that. What we found that the online is really good at is the studying something new and also reviewing something. The online is really good at it, but experiencing at the first hand is, of course, that the offline is something we have to go for the offline. So it's not the a purely virtual environment thing, but we really cannot get rid of offline experience, even though the outside world is slightly risky. So what we are going to probably, I mean, it can become like, 4 weeks and then 1 week of offline, 5 weeks of online, and 1 week of offline. We are going to find out what is the best balance for the students' development. But we are going to try that, and then probably we are going to internationally present what kind of a finding we're gonna get. Sorry.
I would be really interested to hear from the group, like how do you see the role of the teacher? And I had a very sobering moment. We were writing a federal grant earlier this spring, and one of our partners, who's a education researcher at a university, said that they were told that they should really plan on some sort of virtual learning for the next 2 to 3 years. And that really, I felt like I got punched in the stomach at that moment. It was just very sobering to hear, okay, this is how long we have to think about this. And I really feel like the role of the teacher is going to be very different. And I to Crystal's earlier point, I think the individualized learning plans, I think now is a really unique time to be able to do that. And it's do some of the teachers, become really they're teaching more students, and then you have more of a supporting role who's really focused on student and kind of parent well-being, and connection within the school. I think our most successful school partnerships have been when the school has some sort of STEM coordinator or out of school time coordinator that is mapping out those pathways for individual use so that they have some kind of enriching after school activity. And I think I just see that role change, and I'm really curious to hear the rest of the panel and their thoughts on it.
I think for me, I think the role of the educator now is going to be a bridge builder. One, because it's so many new people in the educational space, and they have to do some of the roles that they wouldn't normally have to in the classroom. Then it's up to our teachers to really be building bridges and to help close some of those voids so that we can come into that space with a better unified one thing for the child to do great, right? So my biggest concern about virtual is that everybody's talking about the platform we're going to use and the technology that we're going to have. Oh, and it's really cool and it looks great. My more concern is, are you learning, right? So long, and you don't know what the slide is for each child. That's the first reason that we brought up individual academic plans. And the second part is, to your point, is to what is the role of the teacher to get each child individually back on track. It's not going to be a one set way of doing that. And I think that's also can be a pivotal role for the teacher. And then if they do parent engagement properly and parent education properly, then you'll have parents at home, such as myself, who will do everything they can to help uplift, help learn, log on, whatever it is that I need to be doing, especially for the younger students, to make sure that they're being engaged in learning. And then for the older children, like my 17-year-old, he's self-sufficient. He's been on computers since kindergarten. He can navigate it on his own. And then what I admonish him to do is to make sure you're getting everything out of that class that you will be getting in that classroom. Asking questions, writing notes down, connecting with your friends the same way you always did. Young people create knowledge groups and Snapchats and all this here stuff. They did it during the spring. So I know that older children navigate better, but for younger children, if the people with the technology give us enough information to navigate it, and then the teachers learn it well enough to now we can go really into real learning and not just engagement, then we've done something that I call innovative. But if we're just going to present all these cool looking video game type of platforms and we're not making sure that students are being educated on them, then to me, it's to a disservice, and it pushes up the inequities that everybody has been able to see before COVID-19. I want to say that too. This is not a COVID-19 issue. Our schools in St. Louis specifically were inequitable before COVID even hit, and students were not learning and were underperforming in schools for decades. So now we have an opportunity because of COVID to talk about it, and everybody's on the same page about it, because nobody can say that it's not happening anymore. And now we can go in this space and really do what we call innovate. And that's to really change and ensure that students are learning in the space of virtual and or brick and mortar. I'm sorry, that's all I got to say.
I'll piggyback on, I think that I'm a firm believer that you can tell a lot about a society based on how they treat the most vulnerable. And if we look at our education system and we think about this achievement gap that we've had literally forever, first it was systemic because it was, not allowing women, people of color, to access education. Literally just in the 70s and 80s, we weren't allowing people in, of why we have a crisis in the world of computer science. But just if we think about a student or people and their hierarchy of needs, right? At the top of the pyramid is someone being able to make a decision that they want to improve something for themselves. At the very foundation, when we look at physiological needs and security and safety and having shelter, we have to ask ourselves, how are we using technology to go beyond the top layer of this? We want them to succeed academically. How are we looking at the foundation? How are we looking at the basis of the student socially, and asking ourselves, how are we using technology in the world of social emotional learning and engaging parents and families? Because if we've had an achievement gap and we've had issues in education around engagement of families and a holistic support, because so many of our students lack a caring adult to support them when they're in school, so we can close our eyes because our kids go to schools and we say, okay, they're in school, they're safe, and they're being around people who should support them. What is happening when we now have transitioned to technology and students who have to take care of themselves or their siblings? And, again, it goes back to that point of our most vulnerable. Are we spending enough? Which I don't think, obviously, we're not spending enough from the top, because it takes money, real investment, to address those things. So, the idea is, how do we leverage technology on the holistic approach of the child's development?
I just wanted to sort of touch on something that Crystal mentioned, which is that really the platform isn't really what is going to drive education and what's going to drive really good learning outcomes. One of the things that we've seen over the last period with schools shutting down, at least in Australia, and I'm not entirely sure whether this is the experience in the rest of the world, is one of the things that Carlos made a point about, which is that teachers are so incredibly time poor. They were forced to pivot really, really quickly from what they had done every day for their whole careers, which is teaching students face-to-face, being able to look them in the eye, being able to empathize with them in a really, really personal way, to having to switch to this online environment. And so one of the things that we've seen is that the most successful companies that have come out the other side of these is actually not really about the technology at all, but about people who have been providing content, which have been supporting teachers and making life easier for teachers. So some examples of Australian companies, things like Education Perfect and ClickView, who have libraries full of content, and you'll probably see things like Khan Academy would be assigned quite often, which is to say teachers can assign work, and the role of the teacher, going back to what David's talking about, is really a facilitator, but I think a lot of it is really about that social engagement and social interaction and monitoring their students' well-being. An example that I can give is one of my customers for my personal company, STEM Reactor. I did a lot of online demonstrations for the students when we went into lockdown, so that they would have an experience of being in the laboratory again, even though they were at home. And after some of the calls, the teachers would just sit and talk to the students for the last 15 minutes of the session that they had left over. And it wasn't about the content. It wasn't even about revising anything. It was just touching base with their students and having some time for their students to express whatever it is that they were feeling. And I think that's really going to be a really difficult thing to recreate in the digital environment, which is the social aspect of being in the classroom, and especially for younger children, where being social is really a physical experience. That's going to be incredibly difficult. And I think what you're doing, Master, is really, really interesting in that space. But I actually have a question for Crystal. Specifically, and it's really around something that I really hadn't thought seriously about until this call, which is like, what are your thoughts on what we can do to really enable better collaboration between teachers and parents? Because that question of what are these new ideas that we're testing while schools and campuses are closed, I actually really think the real new idea is like the role of the parent in the learning experience and the learning journey. Because like having parents working full time and trying to like support their children is it's just something completely new.
I think if educators and like grass top people start understanding that parents really care about their children, then they'll approach those situations in a better way. I also think that we should stop. I think you all brought up the anti-racist thing earlier, but also one of those things or practices is that they listen and move with the wealthier families than they do the poor and underserved, and they assume because people don't show up or they're unreachable sometimes that those parents don't care about them. So one thing I think is that we need to start valuing families, no matter their demographic and or monetary value. Because when you start doing that, you'll start getting to the hearts of what's happening in some of those homes, what some of those parents really need to really show up in this. And then you'll see how wonderful of a support they can even become to the teacher for that child if you start valuing their opinions and thoughts without judgment. So I think that's where people should start. Like enter into those spaces knowing that they may or may not speak well, they may or may not be rich or poor, they may or may not be even a person who can articulate. But if you give them time and you start letting them know you value their children, then they will show up in a way that you've never seen. So if people start navigating that way, which is what we're doing in St. Louis right now, teachers and parents are starting to unite. That's the one thing the system never expected to happen, that we will all get on the same page, that everybody is start asking for the same things, that everybody is recognizing the importance of each other. And one thing I think parents have learned is how valuable teachers are. So they might not come to you with an attitude this time because they done had little Johnny at home like for a couple of months. He been acting up and doing whatever same stuff maybe the teacher was trying to say to you before and you didn't want to listen, myself included, because I got a 9-year-old. But I understand now because trying to get that 9-year-old to sit there and read that book was frustrating. Trying to get that 9-year-old to really sit down and get these math done was frustrating. So imagine the teacher with 15 of my daughter. You know what I'm saying? Like I can use my own child. She's a smart kid and she's in the private school, but she still got an attention problem because if Lauren don't want to do something, she don't want to do it. And I'm her mother. So imagine how that teacher felt. So what I'm trying to say to answer your question and get to the point is the more conversations we have in a transparent way and people can come into that space and be themselves and not feel like they're going to be judged, the better we will go together in unity for bridge builders in a way to build solid foundations for kids. It's why I call my organization Bridge to Hope. Everybody has to get on the bridge. The educator, the school leader, the parent, the teacher, the janitor, the nurse, the doctor, anybody that has something to do with a child, you're going to have to get on the bridge because the point is that we want the child to succeed. So we have to put aside our political thoughts and differences and move in a space that's going to make sure that we're uplifting that child in a way that's most prevalent. Period. That's the best way I can say.
Hi, guys. Arnell Milhouse here, and I've been listening in. I had some technical difficulties earlier, but very, very great words of wisdom and insight that everyone's shared. And what I would like to add to that is there's been a shift at the core here in America, and that shift has been toward privatization, the privatization of everything. Of medicine, of postal delivery, you name it. And unbridled capitalism right now is going to be our undoing, I believe. And I'm a capitalist, I'm an entrepreneur. I work with startups and we have the big bright-eyed vision of building these billion-dollar corporations. But education, and you look at every other public service that we have in this country, and it no longer fits the American model of doing business. Public education isn't good business. Public hospitals are not good business. And so now public education has become an afterthought. No one really cares. And systemically, the way it hasn't changed, we haven't evolved the concept and the confluence between public education or public modalities in general and their outmoded techniques, combining with technology, which all across the board has been lowering the cost of delivering goods and services. And public education is still shackled. But Clayton Christensen, he's the Harvard professor, rest in peace, just passed away last year. There were about 4 or 5 years ago that he was predicting that 50% of all colleges were going to go out of business. And I believe that's what we're facing right now, is that the cost structure continually rises for public schools. And yet the cost per student remains the same, or the funding per student is remaining the same. We have to really dig deep and look at this almost from an entrepreneurial, from a business perspective, and seeing that this formula, it's really, as I've looked at the way that a lot of the public services currently exist, they're bankrupt and they're on life support. We're performing triage to keep it going and acting as if everything is normal. But there's no way that we can, and I believe that, you know, one of the number, someone said it a minute ago, it's not necessarily about the technology. It's not about what this curriculum versus that curriculum. It's always about a caring individual, a caring teacher in the classroom. But what I see, I have so many friends that are teachers on my social media, and it's interesting. You can see that the situation is collapsed because they're doing fundraisers to raise money to get this, or in their classrooms, there's mold and it cannot be removed. And so one teacher, she recently posted on Facebook, she did a fundraiser to buy an air purifier and humidifier for her room. She did that, the number of illnesses decreased significantly. But the teachers, it's tough for them to care because they're stressed and they're taxed. Sort of the way that, you know, people are talking about the police department are carrying all these extra roles that they shouldn't. The teachers are being put into positions that they cannot save. And we have to look at it holistically. We have to be able to figure out how to do a deep dive. And I would love to be able to work with everyone on this call here. I think if we can formulate a 2-year, a 3-year plan, working with the Venture Cafe, CIC, and coming together to really approach how can we fix this economically and systemically so that the teachers can really get back to loving their job and not going home feeling so defeated. And so those are 2 of my cents.
Thank you, Arnell. Thank you for and, you know, immediately jumping in and adding your voice to the conversation. We have a little less than 10 minutes. It's hard to believe time flies so fast when you're in good conversation. But I think you just kind of prompted us into, you know, the last question, Arnell, and really just to think about, like, what from your perspectives and even what you would want to see, what does the future hold? What does the next, you know, I mean, our prompted question is 2, 5, 10 years, but I think about the immediate. I think about my baby, right?
Yes.
My babies going back into this educational environment. I think about all the babies going back into this educational environment. And a lot of my work and role is to support teachers, as you are like really leaning into, Arnell, like our teachers, you know, when we talk about who's on the front line, who is serving and dealing with the most impacted, it is really important that we lift our teachers as well. And so, just from your perspectives and for you, like, what does the future hold for us?
Mm-hmm.
And it pertains to this conversation, but then also if you want to add, what do you hope we're all leaning into? And I'm just opening it up to the floor. Carlos, you immediately took yourself off mute, so go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah. I mean, I love the conversation about teachers. I think it's so important, having been in the classroom and seeing the struggle and seeing the lack of support and resources. I'm glad that we're having the conversation. It's sad that it took this type of event to, bring it to the forefront. But in terms of what we can do immediately, I think, as far to piggyback on what Crystal mentioned is like, I freaked out having a 4-year-old who was, had a routine of going to his Montessori school, and I would drop him off, and there were certain milestones in his life that I would kind of miss because he was in school, and now I'm, blessed to be able to be home and work and be with him in the good and the bad. But it boils back down to the physiological needs. Like, what does he need? He needs someone that loves him, right? He needs to be loved. He needs to feel safe, secure. Is he going to learn how to read eventually, right? But I'm just more worried that he feels that with all the madness that he has a sense of security in whatever way that means, right? Because parents have different schedules, and children are so resilient that they are able to adapt to their environments better than us adults, right? Because we can't teach the old dog new tricks, although you can. But the one thing I want to point out is that if you think about our higher education system, right, if you want to look at some of our antiquated ideas, right, in higher ed, in college, you are judged based on how many hours your butt is in the seat, right? Your credits are determined by how many hours you spend in class. Your degree is determined by how many hours per class, right? So we have this backwards mentality that the amount of hours that you have or put in are going to determine what your output is. And what we're seeing in a work environment is that it's not about how much time you sit in front of your desk. It's what did you do? What did you produce? How did you produce it? So we have to redefine competencies and what it means to be successful, what it means to, when someone says there's talent, like, what does talent mean, right? And until we start to change the minds of employers who right now have bias processes built in because of our systemic issues that we have, until we start to get school administrators and district representatives aware of how, it's more about competency than it is how many hours you are in your seat, then we are still going to be reactive to the system. And our goal, obviously, is to create the environment where at every part of this pipeline, there are people actively creating change versus just the people who are home with their kids, reacting to the environments that they're in.
I totally agree. I mean, like each student should decide her own goal. Why school decides, what to achieve. Why, parents decide what to achieve. Students they do have the capacity to decide what is their best. And then, we should arrange the environment for them to achieve the goal. And I think, I totally agree with Carlos and, what Crystal said beforehand. It's, of course, like, parents need support, parents need training, teachers need support, teachers need training. But I think when we think about the roles we need in our education system, I think it is not necessary to divide the roles to teachers, parents, and children. Why can't we mix it up? Some parents can cover some of teachers' job. Some children can cover the parents' role for some kids. We are dividing too much and too many things, so that we have to control each essences, and then now we are out of control. Why we can't mix it up? That's I always think about it, because of course we are human beings, so we think things human-centrically, but right now we are under this, COVID-19, and then as Crystal mentioned, before COVID-19, education system has its own problem already. But just COVID-19 made it just more clear. That's it. So we are thinking, attacking the same problem before and with and after coronavirus. So we really think, shift our mindset into the new version. And then, as an ecologist, I have observed human developments in various environments. And then one thing I'm very sure is when people teach, children don't develop. And when people arrange environment for their development, they develop and grow. So, it is very natural and no wonder for an ecologist. Every organism is depend on environment. So that's why I don't teach. I just arrange. I cultivate and tailor environment for each child in front of us. So I think education is not about teaching. It is about educing ability, capacity, emotions, insights gifted to every one of us. So I really think that, each one of us, like teacher, parent, children, like us, supporters of educators, each of us can set our own goal. And then, collectively, that can be the best future. That's what I believe. Thanks.
Do we have 20 seconds? I would like to simply add in 10 seconds. I really believe that the solution is going to come from outside of the current environment, because you have contracted unions and organizations that are entrenched. They are not going to let go of their power. But I believe that you have to have, what's going to happen is that a startup is going to be created, or startups are going to be created around the country that are going to prove a new model that works. And we need to look for those and really be the wind beneath their wings.
I agree with Arnell. I feel like someone is going to figure out the accreditation piece of high quality sort of virtual like education. And it's really going to, I think, change, I like, let's connect, because I want to do that too. But I do, to your previous point, I feel like one of the things we have to really ask ourselves is like why we are where we are. It seems like in America, we have a system that really hasn't been updated much since like the 1890s, as far as education. And like, when we think about like, what is government? And to me, government is like the things that we decide to do together because we can't do them individually. Like, I don't want to build roads. I would build a terrible road, but I will pay taxes to have a road built. And I think the same with when you think about the school is, school is something we should be doing together. I think to Maz's point is like, and to Crystal's point is that the parents really need to be heavily engaged in the school community. And I think that really is incumbent upon the school to meet parents where they are, and to have to be using text messaging platforms and to be using various tactics where not every parent can show up to a meeting at 7 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. And I think we really need to understand that, like, now that we're in this virtual environment, you can engage parents on these platforms as well. And I think there's more opportunity to really re-envision what are we putting our tax dollars towards. Because at the end of the day, it's like it's the taxes that fund. I mean, in America, it's property taxes that fund education, and to me, it's like we're not getting a good return on that investment. We're sort of throwing money into this abyss, and it's like, well, what are we getting out of it? Because it's clearly like and it's like why it's like why am I dumping money into this kind of bathtub with no bottom? Like it's and I think we really need to look at those systems and really decide, like, what are the things that we value and want to do together. And the other point, I think we outside of Philadelphia, there's this group called B Corp, and I think they're a really interesting group. But I'll put it in the chat. They came up with this idea of the triple bottom line, which is not only just, profits are important for business, but like people and planet. So it's like, is what you're doing good for your profits? Great. Is what you're doing good for people? That, that also needs to be part of it. Is what you're good doing for the planet or the environment? And I think thinking in this idea of a triple bottom line is, we have, spent probably the last 50 years in America thinking about quarterly reports and like, are we doing better than we were in the last 3 months? And I think we really have a short-sighted view of like what education is and what a lot of the systems are. And so we're just looking at them as these snapshots rather than looking at it, as Carlos said, it's a holistic way, and thinking about the system as a whole.
I thank you, David. We are at over time. I first want to just thank each of you for your voice, your expertise, and joining this conversation today.